agency does have discretion, and we also can make modifications based on our climatic conditions. So that's not why the energy codes were imposed. Oh, God, I can't see. Brian? Okay, I can see the freckles on your face now. All right. The work and recommendations of the public through the Ventura Safe Housing Collaborative are an important element of restoring trust in our city's government. If the recommendations are allowed to be corrupted, they will not serve that purpose. They have been corrupted. I'm sorry if I sound angry. I am a little angry. Establishing an ordinance to create safety and legalizing our existing granny flats in the city so our residents could all find shelter no matter how poor, how elderly, how disabled, how jobless, or unfortunate was to be a cornerstone of your trust-building efforts. The ordinance has remained out of reach for those who needed it most, and it has been an embarrassing failure. As hard as you tried to do something good for our community and our less fortunate, the ordinance got twisted once out of your hands. So those for whom it was originally intended were denied access or could not apply. It appears that our policies have already caused us to lose 20 low-income granny flats or units that we so desperately need. You're talking about the potential tonight. I'm talking about what we already have, preserving it. Where did these evicted souls go that were put out of these 20 units? Harbor Church? To prove my point, I've given you the original list of 50 granny flats that were cited by code enforcement for not having a formal permit in the public records as of May 2011. 20 already dropped off this list. You get off the citation list by gutting your granny flat or enrolling in the program. They did not enroll. Comparing that list with this year's list, you will see that 50 in all have not applied for the amnesty program. None were yellow tagged for safety issues. As of December 31st, if you do not act, these will all be destroyed, and many hundreds after that. When we have so many struggling in our community, this enforced destruction of existing affordable housing undermines all of your efforts to rebuild trust. It is more than a financial taking that degrades the worth of our whole community. It is a taking from our elderly, our poor, our sick, and our families. This lack of humanity degrades us all as human beings. Here's what was said by our planning commissioners that reveals why people do not apply and how the chief building officer views potential applicants. Commissioner Ramirez stated that he was opposed to the unnecessary criminalization of applicants who were unable to comply with the requirements after they signed up for the program. The threat of a misdemeanor and 6 months in jail would certainly limit applications, would it not? That was another add-on. It did not come from you. Commissioner Boydston was opposed to the unfairness of turning away applicants who had complied with code enforcement's direction to gut their granny flats, while allowing those who ignored that direction to apply. That was another add-on. It did not come from you. Commissioner Boydston was clearly concerned about the unfairness of this inclusion in the ordinance, so he asked the chief building officer for an explanation. The response was heartbreaking to hear. His reason was not about safety, compassion, fee recovery, or fairness. The chief building official simply replied, quote, I was trying to avoid a hairball, unquote. This, it's just, I just can't believe it. This is already, oh, I'm missing, okay. This evidenced the fact that he wanted to discourage applicants from the very beginning. That was at the beginning. He was trying to discourage them. If it was too much work to follow your intent and your direction, why didn't he just say so, instead of placing the booby traps into the ordinance that caused it to fail? This hurts our community, and it sabotages your goals of restoring trust. On May 1st of this year, the chief building officer, behind closed doors, effectively amended your ordinance again, delivering a death blow this time. Knowing that most of Ventura's homes do not comply with the new Title 24 modern energy codes for new construction, and we were told tonight that you can't prove that this is new construction. But our primary homes in Ondolando, homes up in Hobson Heights, homes all over the city don't have this kind of construction and insulation and the double windows and all that thing, because they don't need it. We live here because we have a perfect climate. We put up with all this because of the climate. But he imposed these new energy requirements onto our vintage granny flats when our primary homes couldn't even comply. This was a surefire way to kill the ordinance, so he did it. The state law says we have discretion on enforcement of Title 24 requirements, and they can be amended due to climatic conditions, but that was not done. Our mayor and council person getting their own granny flats legal under more lenient rules creates a double standard, and that also destroys trust in our council. The chief building officer exempted them, saying anyone who completed the process before May 1st would not have to comply with the much harsher rules. However, the public records reveal that our council members' final permits were dated after May 1st. So certainly, with equal treatment under the law, we expect them to complete the newly imposed energy audit as well. You have sworn to uphold the Constitution of the United States, which says we are all to be treated equally under the law. To do less is a violation of your oath. It creates distrust, and there would be much harm done to our families as a result. Please, please, restore trust. Show your humanity. Extend the second unit ordinance for the rest of our community. Thank you.
Okay, Camille, thank you. John Stewart.
Good evening again. John Stewart, Ventura. Briefly, the statewide code on enforcing second unit housing is clear, and the city attorney knows about it. I brought it up before, and he just ignores it. So maybe there needs to be a grand jury thing on that. I don't know. The main thing I wanted to comment on tonight was I'm a restaurant design consultant, have been for 42 years. Over the last several months, I've had a series of memos back and forth with wastewater. In the last 20 years, most jurisdictions, most cities have tried to comply with wastewater rules. 6 months ago, the city sent a guy around to all the restaurants in town, indicating to them that they had to put in a grease interceptor, a 750-gallon grease interceptor, which installed outside the premises of a restaurant can cost up to 20 grand. There was no reason why it had to be that size. There was no stipulation. When I challenged it politely, we had a really good interchange with staff, and they said, well, why don't you suggest what you think would be appropriate? So I suggested what I thought would be appropriate. They didn't want that one, but they wanted one that was only 100 gallons. So we've come to an agreement for one of my clients who happens to be on Seaward to do that. The reason I wanted to bring this to y'all's attention is this rule or set of rules is being now enforced in a very police kind of way by an agent from the wastewater department coming around to every restaurant and saying, you've got 30 days to comply, you're out of compliance, et cetera, and they're all freaking out. So I would suggest that the city kind of take a look at this.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart.
Okay.
Okay, and we'll now go to council communications. Any comments from anyone? Councilmember Brennan?
Mr. Mayor, I see Mr. Watkins making notes in regards to the wastewater. I imagine that's what it's about, and I think Mr. Stewart, who is a professional in that industry, I know it came out a couple years ago, the state, our MPDES, all our water quality stuff's getting tighter and tighter, and the wastewater has been a kind of the enforcer of that, certainly for new restaurants. They do have, we were requiring them to be underground. They do now have some that, I think as John mentioned, you can actually put inside the restaurant. That makes it a little bit easier, less expensive, but still somewhat formidable. So I would be curious myself just to know how, I know I saw letters go out. Somebody showed me a letter in a restaurant that said, hey, I want to say maybe about 6 months ago that this was coming. And but I would like to just kind of maybe be interested in the report back as to just kind of what jurisdiction and where it's coming from. But I know that we have, you know, I know especially when we have the cluster that we do of restaurants in some of the older infrastructure, I know I see the grease truck out there on almost a every other day basis. So I know that's a concern also. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Mr. Mayor, before I let go, I mean, I just want to say, I know Mr. Levin, Charles Levins was here. He gave us all a letter, and I don't know if the city manager got it, but I know Mr. Levin probably was a little upset, thinking it was going to obviously take longer than 1 minute to read this into the record, but it dealt with the difference, and I think for mainly to Andrew Steffler, if he could get this letter to him, it's the difference between, I think, water permits for water heaters. You can go in and do it for yourself if you have a residential, but you need to get a plumber when you go to a condo. And I imagine that's because there's multi-use and there's a lot of people that would be needed to know that you had gotten a permit rather than for your own home, because there's surrounding owners that share condos. But I was just wondering if you could pass this on to Mr. Steffler, we could get an answer on that. Thank you.
We'll do that. Okay, I'm just going to take a moment to comment on on Camille's remarks about the second unit. Just to point out that both Councilmember Weir and I were required to recuse ourselves from any discussion related to the second unit amnesty program. That was over a period of, I think, about 2 years or more, and we did that. We didn't participate in that. Once that ordinance was put in effect, we had the same rights as any other citizen to take advantage of that program, which we